So just finding how to hold your body. You might close your eyes or just lower your gaze so we can all step out of the Zoom screen for a little while, see what's going on inside. So I usually take a little while to kind of work way around to the breath, but you can start by just being aware of the breath in a kind of general way, just noticing that you're breathing, and then bringing more awareness, more of a general awareness into your body. So feeling how you're holding your posture, relaxing your shoulders, softening your belly, trying to bring a kind of quality of ease, just to be settled, not trying to accomplish anything, but just letting yourself arrive. What's the general state of your body? What's your body feeling like? What's your mind state or your mood right now? If you're newer to meditation, there can be a kind of self-consciousness that, oh, now I'm meditating, now, what does this mean? Or what am I supposed to do? Or this feels odd. Any kind of self-consciousness that might get in the way of just the simplicity of awareness, just being here. So this quality of mindfulness, of being present, we don't have to do a lot with it. It actually sort of runs itself. It sort of creates a natural state of calming and some clarity just by starting to pay attention really to anything, to the body, to the feelings, to thoughts, to sounds. As soon as we kind of step out of the cycle of thoughts, there's a shift. And there can be a shift in perception, just in how we're experiencing our senses. So I like to just take a little time to sort of arriving before necessarily trying to direct the attention, try to control the attention. But once you have the sense that you've kind of prepared, that you're here, and to start to more intentionally feel the breath. And really, you don't have to use the breath, but it's a very simple and kind of neutral thing to work with. The idea is to pay attention to some particularly physical experience that, or sense experience that's happening in real time. It's not a thought. And the breath is easily available and has a kind of naturally calming quality to it. It's relatively neutral, not terribly pleasant or unpleasant. And it's also got this rhythm and flow to it. It sort of can help the concentration, the two parts of in breath and out breath. So starting by paying attention to those two aspects of breath, and particularly noticing the difference between the feeling of breathing in, the feeling of breathing out. They're both quite subtle, but when we contrast them, it becomes easier to notice the sensations, that distinction. So at the nostrils, there's a feeling, touch of the air. There's the temperature of the air, which changes when it's coming in or going out. You might feel the way the nostrils move, the in-breath. Nostrils are kind of sucked in a little bit. Out-breath, they're stretched out, ballooned a bit. Very subtle, but that's the point. When we pay attention to something very subtle, then the mind becomes more concentrated just naturally through that effort. It's not a struggle, it's just a natural result of paying attention very closely. You can work in the same way with the belly, just the movement of the breath in the belly. Again, seeing the contrast between the in-breath and out-breath, expansion, contraction. The challenge of meditation, of course, is the intrusion of thoughts, the tendency for the mind to take us away from these direct sense experiences. So we keep coming back. This is the simple essence of practice. When you recognize the mind has wandered, bringing the attention back to the breath. It's easy to get into a kind of struggle with our thoughts when they're very persistent. Maybe we're having a hard time really absorbing into the breath, really connecting with the breath. And the mind just wants to go off. Or perhaps there's some really persistent thought that you're stuck in. We can wind up in this kind of attempt to push away or suppress the thoughts. And this just tends to compound the problem. It tends to just create more agitation in the mind. So when it feels as if the thoughts are kind of dragging you away, try opening the attention further and seeing if there is some underlying feeling, some emotions, a mood that's kind of stirring things up. And see if you can just allow that in, to accept that. Sometimes our attempt to suppress a feeling then triggers thoughts, so the aversion just creates a kind of negative energy that manifests in anxious or worried or some other kind of disturbed thoughts. So this kind of more open attention is still grounded in the body, and it still can include the breath, but it includes a larger field of awareness than just the breath. Allows the whole kind of realm of felt experience, both sensed, sort of sensory and emotional, held together. Right. So I was part of what I was kind of getting at there in the meditation instruction was what I was going to talk about tonight. And, I mentioned this, kind of started getting into this on Tuesday. Um, as I was reading from One Breath at a Time, and for those who are new to this class, I guess I'll call it, I've been working through my book One Breath at a Time over the last 9 months now, 10 months. And in step 6, which is where we are, there's for 3 sections called Feeling Feelings. And we're still on the first feeling feelings. And um, and I mentioned in there Jack Kornfield's book, A Path with Heart. And there's a chapter called Difficult Problems and Insistent Visitors. And if you don't have this book, I really recommend it as, I think, one of the best books uh, on spiritual practice ever written. A Path with Heart, A Guide Through the Perils and Promises of Spiritual Life. It came out in 1993. I don't know. Um, I know some books don't age well. Some of these kind of Dharma books don't age well. This seems to be still very relevant. Um, so he is talking about working with difficult feelings, and um, so he's got these sort of 4 elements. He does this thing where this is something he does in his book, A Wise Heart, too, where he kind of creates like a set of principles. He says there are a few basic principles for learning how to open our stuck places and release the contradictions of the body of fear. I'm not sure what the body of fear is, except like our body, I guess. The first of these is called expanding the field of attention. So I think I was reading some of that the other day too, because it's got the thing about the top 10 tunes. But so this is a part of what I was talking about in the guided meditation, this idea of um, as you're meditating, and if you start to feel kind of stuck, and one of the ways you'll notice this is that the mind won't settle at all. You can't get any kind of clarity. You can't get to your breath, or it just keeps spinning out. Um, so expanding the field of attention sort of helps you to find where that energy is coming from. Um, it so what we call concentration, uh, or samadhi in meditation isn't the same thing as concentrating on uh, at, at least there are aspects of it that are not the same thing as just concentrating on reading a book or staring at something. It's a lot of what we call concentration is really about calming the body as much as it is calming the mind. Or maybe that's not quite right. That that's kind of a holistic calming. It's not just uh, stopping your thoughts. And this is where I think there's confusion and people struggle in meditation a lot. Is that we get the idea that it's all about thoughts, stopping thoughts. Once I stop thoughts, then I'm meditating. But this idea, and where I'm going to get at tonight and talking about expanding the field of attention, starts it is like not really even making thoughts the thing, making more the body in a general way be your primary kind of focal focus. And of course, the breath is in the body, but um, when we turn it into this battle between me and my thoughts, or my breath and my thoughts, we're kind of keeping our whole meditation just from the neck up. And when we kind of expand our awareness, sort of become more aware of the whole body and kind of awareness itself, it can sort of see thoughts as just one element in there, and that if we're not disturbed by the thoughts, if we don't try to if we don't try to stop them, but particularly if we don't judge them, uh, then they can kind of like just be there, but they're not sort of dominating necessarily. So in a way, it's kind of like I think of it as a changing focal point. Like normally, it's like thoughts are in the foreground, and this is like, can thoughts be in the background? And so then letting body and this broader awareness be the foreground. So expanding the field of attention. And then he says, um, so at the last paragraph of that section, he says, repeated thoughts and stories are almost always fueled by an unacknowledged emotion or feeling underneath. These unsensed feelings are part of what brings the thought back time and again. Right? So the unsensed feelings bring the thoughts back. Again, like the section that we're talking about in my book is called Feeling Feelings. And, you know, clearly Jack influenced my thinking about this. He says, future planning is usually fueled by anxiety. Remembering the past is often fueled by regret or guilt or grief. Many fantasies arise as a response to pain or emptiness. The task in meditation is to drop below the level of the repeated recorded message. So out of the kind of, again, kind of not having the thoughts be the primary thing, letting them fall in the background, and feel the energy that brings it up. The task in meditation is to drop below the level of the repeated recorded message to sense and feel the energy that brings it up. When we can do this and truly come to terms with the feeling, the thought will no longer need to arise and the pattern will naturally fade away. It's really striking to me because I was reading this today and I haven't gone through this book carefully in a long time. It was striking to me how much this is what I teach all the time. And just to acknowledge, like, you know, I first practiced with Jack Kornfield in 1981, and I went on a 3-week retreat, a 3-month retreat that year. And it clearly, you know, his thinking got, you know, and working with him directly got really into my awareness to the point that I didn't even realize how much I was influenced by it. But that's Dharma, right? He's just teaching the truth, right? And so somebody else writes a book named Kevin Griffin, and it just turns out to be the same thing, you know. It's not, you know, the Dharma. Uh, the Buddha didn't create the Dharma, right? Dharma is just Dharma. So the next, so he has this first principle is expand the field of attention. The second principle is a full awareness of the feelings. Not surprisingly, since he just told us that, is the feeling level that controls most of our inner life, yet often we are truly unconscious of our feelings. Our culture has taught us contraction and suppression. Quote, showing emotions is not seemly for a man, and only certain emotions are allowed for women. When we have not learned to talk about feelings or even be aware of them, our life remains entangled. Um, says, free is not free from feelings, free, but free to feel each one and let it move on, unafraid of the movement of life. Hmm. We can sense what feeling is at the center of each experience and open to it fully. This is a movement toward freedom. So, you know, this suggestion that we really bring this tuning in. Let me go back and just when pleasant feelings arise, we automatically grasp them, or when unpleasant feelings arise, we try to avoid them. And that way, we set up a chain reaction of entanglement and suffering. This perpetuates the body of fear. So again, like getting at like, how does this all happen, right? Why do we get to this place? Well, when a pleasant feeling arises, we try to make them stay, and when an unpleasant feeling arises, we try to get rid of it or avoid it. Well, either way, it's just creating more energy rather than just saying, "Oh, here's a feeling. What does it feel like? Let me be with it. Can I allow it to be there without running, without grasping?" So the next section is called discovering what is asking for acceptance. So he says, this may sound like a very complicated and busy way to meditate, how he's been describing working with feelings. But in practice, it is very simple. The general rule is simply to sit and be aware of what arises. If there are repeated patterns, expand the field of awareness, then sense what is asking for acceptance. This is the third principle. Repeated patterns remain because of some level of resistance. An aversion, fear, or judgment locks them in. This contraction is built out of fear. To release it, we must acknowledge what is present and ask our heart, how am I receiving this? Do we wish it to change? Is there a difficult feeling, belief, or sensation we have contracted around that we want to be over or go away? Is there some attachment, some fear? So again, so there's this process, first expanding our field of awareness, and then which means like, uh-oh, when you do that, what happens is like, oh, there's feelings here. Okay, I have to be mindful of them, and I see that like there's a whole that I'm going to react to them. And so when I see that tendency to react to them, that's where I need to let go of the reactivity. And that's where the acceptance comes in. So if I see I can expand my field of awareness and feel a feeling, and then I can be like, oh shit, I'm having a feeling. Well, that's, you know, not gonna help. So this is another stage. It's not enough to just feel. We have to be able to accept the feeling which means first really seeing especially the tendency of resistance, and then seeing if we can let go of that. So um, the last piece he has here is called open through the center. I'll read a little bit of this. Fundamentally, the acceptance I have described should be enough. However, sometimes an even more careful and directed attention is needed to open our repeated patterns and deepest knots. This is the fourth principle for working with insistent visitors, called opening through the center. The patterns of holding in our body and mind are like knots of energy that have bodily contraction, emotions, memories, and images all intertwined. In this practice, we carefully direct our awareness to each level of a knot, feeling into the center of the pattern. In so doing, we can release our identification with it and discover a fundamental openness and well-being beyond the contraction. How is this done in practice? Now he's referring back to, he had talked about how when he was first a monk, he had all these sexual fantasies, and that he realized it was coming from loneliness. So he says, the loneliness I encountered that was giving rise to sexual fantasies can be an example. It returned often and painfully, even though I named it and felt it with care. Loneliness has been one of my deepest sources of pain for as long as I can remember. I am a twin, and sometimes I think I got my brother to come along in the womb so I could have some company. As with each of the practices I have described, it is best to start with awareness of the body. As the loneliness continued to arise, I brought more careful attention to where it was held. Mostly it felt centered in my stomach. I then tried to feel what are called the physical elements in it, the earth, air, fire, and water, plus sometimes color and texture. It was a hard sphere pulsing in the center, hot and fiery red. So he goes through kind of all the details of this, and then having memories and images that come up. But then he finally gets to this place. Says, as each of these layers opened in awareness, the pain gradually eased, the feeling softened, and the fire subsided. As I continued to feel into the center of the loneliness, I seemed to sense a hole or space. Then I let it open as much as it wanted. As I did, that hole got bigger and softer, and all the vibrations it became very fine. So he's kind of, he's describing this kind of altered state that's happening, right? As he becomes very, very concentrated on the experience, and it's losing its kind of personal quality, and it's just becoming this kind of felt experience. So then he finally says, the whole changed to open space, and its hungry quality shifted. Though it was empty, it became more like clear, empty space. Gradually, this filled more of my body, and with it, a sense of light and fulfillment arose. I filled with a sense of ease and profound contentment and peace. Resting in this open space, the whole notion of rejection and insufficiency was totally unnecessary. I could see that all of it, the loneliness, pain, sadness, thoughts of rejections, was a contraction of my body and mind based on the frightened, very limited sense of self I'd carried. So he's basically having this transcendent moment of seeing beyond, seeing the selfless nature of the experience, and seeing that how he had conceived what was going on was this very personal story, and that personal story, creates this kind of reality. And we all do this, right? In our own story, we create this reality that's like based on our experiences, and then we in our minds we build this cause and effect thing. Well, it's because of this, and my parents were like that, and all of that has a reality to it. But eventually, he starts to see that it's just made up of what its essential nature is not that story, and that it's just to see it as just a felt experience. And you'll see as we go through one breath at a time that I come to something very similar in in the different descriptions of working with feelings. It really struck me as I was reading him, like, wow, like I kind of can't. I wasn't reading his book when I wrote my book, and I wasn't thinking about his book when I wrote it. But it's just like I arrived at the same place because we're going through the same process. This kind of getting to the place of seeing all of it as what we would call empty. That which is a not a very satisfying word to describe something, but there's it's hard to put more language onto it because you start to just be at this felt level that doesn't have a story, it doesn't have a name. You realize that the names are all just created by the mind, and that the suffering is also created by the mind. The the dukkha, that it's our way of taking this felt experience and sort of um, complicating it. I mean, this is what our minds do, and it's because we're very humans are very smart, and we're able, and even that description of it, the story, is not unreal. You can that's a valid way of looking at things, but we get to a point where we realize that even though there's some credibility to that story, it's not useful, and it's not necessary to be stuck in it. That, yeah, I might still have the story, but it's not enveloping me. It's not defining me. I'm seeing that, okay, yeah, there are these experiences. They are unpleasant. They do have causes, but when I get to the heart of them, they're just like energies that just come and go. Just, the flash of lightning in a nighttime sky. There's these images in the suttas of the water foam on the top of a river, the water, the bubbles, uh, just the emptiness of them, that they don't have any substance. So this is kind of, I think for this to have transformative impact, we have to kind of experience it for ourselves. But it helps to just to intellectually understand it and realize, oh, okay, there's another way of looking at this, so that when we do get stuck in things, we can start to shift the way we look at them, and take this approach of these. If I can see if I can remember the expanding the field of awareness, and then becoming more tuned into the feelings, looking at working with acceptance, and then just seeing the emptiness of it. Just trying to make sure I'm saying it. Yeah, expanding the field of attention, then that full awareness of the feelings, and then seeing what needs to be accepted, where the struggle is, and then looking deeper to see that emptiness in there. This is to me really getting at the heart of this practice, um, in terms of the kind of the healing part of it and the struggle part of it. There are other aspects of practice, and I'm going to get to them in uh, at some point in the next few weeks, where I want to talk about what we do once we do get concentration, because so much of this is about like the struggle to get quiet, the struggle to overcome all the demons and all the noise, uh, and I think in our daily lives, and for most of us, if our meditation can just do that, if it can just allow us to find some peace, have some moments of letting go, shift our perspective about the story, that alone uh, is hugely valuable. But again, it's not sort of the end point of where the practice is going. So I'd like to just open it up and see if there are any questions or comments from anyone at this point. Seemed like that was a lot of content for people to absorb. You can either just unmute and, yeah, go ahead, Neil. Speak up. Unmute.
Thanks for the sit, Kevin. I guess I heard a lot of, like when you said felt sense and the get going into the body, a lot of the somatic stuff that I've become very familiar with kind of came up. Is that without going into some kind of long, preamble here? Is that kind of part of it seems like there's a healing that you kind of talk about, and is that something that what you're saying is influenced by?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and yeah, I mean, the healing is, yeah, and I use that word, and it's, I kind of use it almost as a uh, space holder, placeholder for something maybe not very defined, or maybe more complicated. But the idea to me around this work is that a lot of our suffering is created by these cycles of thought, emotion cycles, this feedback loop between our feelings and our thoughts, and And of course, those are all fed by, life experiences as well, like losing a job or having a conflict with a family member or something but the kind of what makes those things really painful is this is our life's conditioning. And for those of us who are addicts, which that there's like a lot of messy stuff in there. And so the point of this is that the way that that gets healed, or the way that that gets released, or that we change how that operates in our life, the role that those feelings have in our life, is through this opening, through this uh, broadening of our attention, accepting of feelings that come up, and letting go too of both the story and the resistance. Because there's the story of why I have these feelings, but then there's the story of why I can't handle it, or why I need to drink because I'm feeling this, or the story of what my excuses around it, all that. And so just letting the feelings in and letting them be there, it's kind of, in a way, it's trying to simplify our experience, to just say, I just the one Jack says, like, this sounds complicated, but really it's just like trying to sit with and allow feelings. I don't know if that's exactly answering your question. Part of what I was thinking of as you were asking the question was, does this approach, uh, I'm not sure this approach fully addresses issues around trauma, which which are often tied in with those feelings. That's another one of the triggers for this kind of uh, problematic thinking and and problematic emotional patterns, is the underlying trauma. And I mean, I don't, I'm not at all an expert on trauma, but my sense is that this work, as Jack is describing it, is essentially the way we work with trauma. And that I think that trauma is on a kind of continuum uh, that starts with just ordinary pain, and when it gets out to more egregious forms of suffering, that we start to give it a name, just in the same way that addiction starts with just ordinary desire, and then as we go out further on that spectrum, it becomes a destructive craving. Um, so you weren't asking about trauma, but somehow I thought maybe that was in there somewhere.
It was, yeah.
Oh, it was. Okay.
It was kind of, it was part of my thinking, but
Yeah, yeah. So I don't know if I answered the question exactly, but
I appreciate your answer.
okay. Thank you. That's generous of you.
Hi, Kevin. This is Angela.
Hi.
I just have a question. I got, and like during the meditation, I was trying to, I mean, I really appreciate it. I think yeah, this is very helpful. I have a hard time, like for me, a lot of what happens during meditation is just like, I guess it's planning. It's not always, worry or, yeah, future planning anxiety, remembering past. I mean, a little bit, but and I was interested by fantasies arise as a response to pain or emptiness.
Mm-hmm.
Just
Right.
yeah, but it's just maybe just more, I need more practice. I'm almost like, I need to go to my like list of feelings from my NVC stuff. Like,
Yeah, right.
I just feel like I think it could be really helpful, but I guess I'm just confused about like where, some of that comes from. Like maybe it's like feelings underneath this, like, fear of being still, or yeah, because coming from someone who is mostly just constantly thinking in my meditation, it's like I want to understand it, but I guess it's just, it feels like my thoughts aren't, like the feelings aren't as obvious maybe, or
Mm.
just help like getting, what are those feelings that are there, or yeah, expand. Maybe part of that is the expansion that
Mhm.
um and yeah, how that expansion comes into play too, I guess. Like,
So, at first I would say, yeah, you don't have to go looking for trouble. Uh, if sometimes it's true that our minds are just kind of busy doing busy work, kind of, that isn't necessarily triggered by some really troubling emotion. And that's where I would sort of point you back to, or point you to Suzuki Roshi, who, Zen Mind, Beginner's Mind, where he just says, let your thoughts come and let them go. Which is, the idea is, again, it's a shift in perspective. And it's another thing that you have to kind of tune into what it means. But I think it is very similar to the expanding awareness. It's kind of like you're sitting and, you're trying to pay attention to your breath, and your mind does this like zoop into the thoughts, right? That's our mind kind of closes and shrinks around the thought world. And it's just like thinking, thinking, thinking. And then you realize, oh, I'm thinking. And you go, oh, and there's that kind of feeling of like, oh, right. Ugh. And for a moment, there's a little bit more sense of spaciousness, right? Does that sort of feel like that, right?
just then I'll go to the breath and
Right,
space, yeah, there.
right. But the idea is that if you can, it's somewhat using the imagination, which Jack is implying, expanding. So it's kind of like when we're closed in around the thoughts, we are creating the sense that the mind is very small. And it's just like now I'm staring at this little screen, like I was talking about the other day, like, and forgetting like, oh, there's this whole room, you know? And so you kind of do that with your mind. You just kind of go, oh, the thoughts are there, but they're in this big room. And so instead of like even trying to, like, the problem with breath is that breath is also very small in a sense, right? Like the mind is thinking is small in terms of kind of the spatial experience of it. The thinking is kind of small and the breath is kind of small. And so it's kind of like you're trying to go back and forth and like hold them off. But if you kind of open it up like, oh, I'm in this room. I'm not just on Zoom, I'm in a room. It's going to get really corny soon. Then I can be aware of like, I can be like this and I see the screen, but I also see the periphery. I see my guitar over there. There's a column there, printer over there, books, you know, I can see all of that. And so it's kind of like letting your vision go a little, like opening your peripheral vision of your mind. That's actually a really, really good way to describe, I think, to get there. Thinking of it as as paying attention to the peripheral vision of your mind. So if you do that, what you'll find is that the thoughts are in there, they're in the room, but they're not the whole room. And your breath is also in the room. It's also not the whole room. The breath doesn't have the same quality of grabbing your attention. So you can pay attention to it without getting lost in it. And so you kind of have it like you're sitting in this room and the thoughts are passing through and your breath is there. You're feeling the breath. You're aware that the thoughts are coming and going, but you're more aware of just being in the room. In that way, yeah, you're not getting into this whole like feeling space so much. You're not sort of trying to figure that out, because admittedly that can become a complicating factor. I think it's good. I think it's worth checking in. It's why I do that when I do the guided meditation. Like, just check in, like, how am I feeling right now? Right? Okay. Like, if you're in a relatively neutral place emotionally, well, that's probably not gonna, make your sitting really disturbed. But if you realize, oh wow, I'm actually bringing a lot of sadness or a lot of anger, a lot of anxiety I have that right now. That was a rough day. Like I just had that conflict or whatever, right? Then it's like, oh, I better give some attention to this. I need to pay attention to this. So it's really a question that we can only answer individually, like what is going on that needs to be addressed? And if there's not something that's going on that needs to be addressed, but my mind is still wandering, then I need to apply other then I can apply, I don't say need, then I can apply other techniques, one of which can simply be a concentration practice. Maybe I should count my breaths for 10 minutes, or something. Uh, is some of the more like techniques that are taught in meditation. I use all that stuff, but I don't tend to, in terms of my teaching, it's not where I'm kind of oriented, because I think that what gets in the way of concentration most of the time is these kind of disturbing thoughts. And if there aren't, or emotions, I should say, which are triggering disturbing thoughts. And if there aren't disturbing feelings, then usually just sitting still for a while, things will naturally calm down. That's one of the reasons why I always encourage the idea that sustained practice is as important as any technique in terms of developing concentration. So that was fun. Thank you all for coming. Saturday in Australia. Yeah. I'll be back here Tuesday, 10 a.m. Pacific time in North America. That's going to be like too early in the morning in Australia, but it's a good time in Europe, evening time in Europe. So, and East Coast folks can make it. Hawaii people might have to get up a little early. Well, 7 in the morning, it's not bad. Wherever you are, all the ships at sea and all that. I hope everybody is staying safe. You know that we're in a critical moment here. We need to hang in and take care of ourselves and avoid that latest strain. We're all going to be getting vaccinated really soon. Then what are we going to do? I don't know. Does that mean we have to stop having classes on Zoom? I don't know.
Hope not. Thank
All
you.
right.
Thank you,
Thanks.
Kevin.
Thanks, guys. Everybody.
Kevin.
Thanks, Kevin.
Good night.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Thanks, Kevin.
Peace, love.